Hey, I'm Karen. I'm a former CPA, entrepreneur, business consultant with big ideas, and I'm the mom.
I'm Katie. I'm a payroll specialist, business owner, and detail-oriented person that makes things happen, and I'm the daughter. Welcome to Cheers to Business.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second live broadcast. Katie's not here today, but I do have a special guest, Miss Gia Wiggins.
Hello.
Miss Wiggins, you have a PhD in management, and you focus on strategy and your experience as HR. Tell us about your company and what you do.
Oh, my company is Morale Resource, and we focus on the overall holistic strategy of an organization as it relates to employee practices. So we do human resources, but we look at it from the standpoint of how do these practices impact the company as a whole. Instead of just provide a bunch of policies and say, hey, go do that, how is it going to impact the finances? How is it going to impact the bottom line and the culture of the organization? And a lot of compliance. Fun stuff, right?
To me, I'm big picture, and so I like to see the effects and cause and the moving pieces. And so, yeah, I think that's awesome because people make knee-jerk reactions or decisions and don't realize the repercussions that can come down the line. And I think that's a basis of discussion of why you were the first pick to do this live broadcast. Yay! Absolutely. With what's going on and in our environment right now and the economic impact, especially on the small business.
Right.
You know, the big corporations, do they have enough funds to be able to pay their people while they work from home? And, you know, the small businesses do not or may not have the resources. So you were a very busy person this weekend, right?
I am. It's, I had an opportunity to put together some communication for my clients and for small and mid-sized businesses about things that they need to be thinking about regarding their employees and regarding what they need to do with their businesses during this pandemic. And so been very busy over the weekend trying to help people to focus on what's important coming into the next couple of weeks.
You know, I think guidelines is the key, the $1,000 word right now because nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows it's continually changing. You know, I was getting text messages about they're going to give $50 billion to the SBA for loans. Well, it's not quite that easy. Once I looked into it and it hasn't been passed.
Right.
How are they going to decide? So there's some conversation on that. The reason I say guidelines is nobody, until it's mandated, nobody can tell you what to do in your business of what you do with you and your team. And this show today is for the business owners and their team. Now, getting back to guidelines, I saw the SBDC, Mel Washington, who leads that in this area, who's a wonderful person.
Fantastic guy.
Love Mel. Well, the Alabama SBDC actually has put out guidelines on their site now. I saw it on Facebook, so tracked it backwards to get to the source, and I have that up. So it's guidance for businesses impacted by coronavirus. And when you say guidelines, what are some of yours that you feel comfortable enough with sharing? And please let me have a disclaimer that please go talk to your own person. Call Gia later. She'll give you the information later on in this broadcast. But please don't hold anything and everything we say in stone. It is everybody's guessing game.
And it's changing constantly.
Constantly.
Well, a couple of things that we were looking at very specifically about how do you make a determination on if the employees should come to work or not? If you're going to make decisions on if you're going to have a remote workforce, if you're going to allow them to be able to telecommute, and if you're going to provide them with PTO. What happens if they don't have
PTO?
PTO
is, for those that don't know,
paid time off. So a lot of companies have sick policies, but they also have vacation and you have sick time. Sick time, of course, is supposed to be used if you're actually sick, and vacation for fun and recreation or if you just want to be away from work. Where PTO is a combination where you don't ask questions. And so I need this time off. Okay, fine. It's granted. You ask for it a couple of days in advance or a week in advance and you're able to have that.
I've always been a fan of PTO versus anything else.
I convert every company over to PTO because it takes away that whole thing of you've got to have a doctor's note or you don't really look sick. I don't think I want to give you this sick
I needed
time.
a mental day.
I know. And, on top of all that, usually a sick time and a vacation time, they roll over differently at the end of the year. It's just a big old headache. Rolling over to PTO is the best way. But in a situation where you have an employee that, let's say, for example, they don't have any PTO or they don't have vacation time or they don't have sick time, One of the things we have to think about as a business owner is if that person cannot afford to be away from work, if they're not feeling well, are they going to actually disclose that they're not feeling well? Or will
I can
they
tell you from experience, no, they're not going to tell you.
Of course not. And or are they going to tell you that they think that their child may have tested positive or will test positive, or if their spouse or someone that they've been taking care of? And so as business owners and as a HR consultant, it's important to have those conversations about the what ifs. So let's try our best to put in contingencies where we can allow people to tell the truth. And if they're not feeling well, they're not having to make a decision between coming to work, ill and, not coming to work and not being able to feed their families.
That's heavy.
It's very heavy, and there's no right or wrong answer, and nothing is stuck in stone. Every company's got to make that decision for themselves. And
well, because that it's not required in the state of Alabama. Vacation, sick, all of that is perks that your business owner decides to give their
Absolutely.
to give their team. So, working out how if they mandate paid sick leave. But what if these small businesses cannot afford, they don't have those policies in place because they're small and they can't afford to pay people when they're not there producing, whether it be at home or not at home?
Right. And that's a really tough conversation that a lot of my clients and even colleagues in the business community are having right now. And I think that the key is to have conversations with your employees as early as possible and be as transparent as possible. Having a conversation and saying, hey, if you're not going to be able to telecommute, you're not going to be able to work remotely. And because we're not producing, I'm not going to be able to afford to be able to pay you for those days. Well, so those days are going to have to go unpaid, but communicating and explaining that you can't afford it and just opening your heart and saying, look, I want to do everything that I can. But here's some things that I can do, and trying to find solutions and positive ways for the things that you can do to possibly help the employees will be critical. But if you just say, sorry, you're not working, you're not going to get paid, you seem like a monster in this type of situation.
Well, what if you don't want to lose that person? Because they've got to eat. They've got to feed their kids.
Right. Creative. I remember, and I'm going to go back to a situation with Hurricane Katrina years ago. And I remember working with a company at the time, and we were having a situation similar to that where there were a lot of people that couldn't come to work for, obvious reasons. And we wanted the employees to know that we loved them and we cared for them. Simple things like providing them with meals. Okay. And providing, clothing or providing water or all these things that we were able to do. We may not have been able to
toilet
give
paper.
them, right. We may not have been able to do exactly what they needed, which is they needed to be able to come into work because we had to shut the organization down. But we were able to at least be able to let them know that we're in this together.
I think that message is so important because, if I look at Payroll Vault over here, who can go remote, and that's why Katie's not here today doing this. They're working on plans. And then I have the company with my brother, which is manufacturing, and those people are building product. They are artists with talents in their hands and their minds, and they're building things, and we can't build if they're not there.
Right.
And so the different industries, and I also think about the restaurant industry right now. My heart bleeds for these bars and restaurants.
Right.
And so one thing I did last night was I wanted to follow up when I heard mandated paid sick leave. All right. So what it is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Okay. So it's passed the House. President Trump supports it. It's headed to the Senate. Who knows? So I think the high points in this are that there's free testing for the coronavirus, but how many people do they have to give the test, and how many tests do they have?
Resources.
All right. Unemployment. Different states have every state's different on how they pay out unemployment. That is an employer tax that's paid in. The employees don't pay it.
Right.
Cents on a dollar that's paid in. So how much do they have to give out? So I'm just trying to show both sides of this. Increased paid Medicaid, defer tax payments, but they voted no to the payroll tax cut. Okay, that's the last thing that I heard.
Yeah.
They were going to stop Social Security and Medicare, but last thing I've seen, but everything we're saying here, it's going to change in 5 minutes.
Right.
All right. So, and I wrote down disclaimer to make sure I put that out there. So, yeah. All right. Another thing that came out was President Trump came out and said $50 billion to the SBA to help people get loans. It's very hard to get an SBA.
It's very difficult to get an SBA loan.
It is. And I know Megan over at Regions Bank, she just does SBA loans. Iberia, go to your banker to see if they have these. But it's not cut and dry. This has not been passed. This is what I read. You have to prove substantial economic injury.
Correct.
That reminded me of the BP oil spill.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So, one, they don't know how yet to substantiate that.
And how do you measure it?
How do you measure it? But I kept reading. I'm glad I didn't do Cliff Notes. Well, it's all Cliff Notes right now. If you have access to credit resources, you are not eligible. So, if you have a line of credit, you got to use that first. If you have loans, you got to use that first. If you have which made my mind go to it, didn't say it. If you have collateral and you have equity in your home, they're going to want you to do that first.
Right.
So how hard is it going to be to get the money? And then if you are eligible, which I think is going to take, pun intended, an act of Congress to do, is the interest rate would be 3.75%, and for nonprofits, 2%.
Okay.
Well, the federal rate just went to 0.
Right.
Or 0.25 or something. Don't quote me. And
it'll change before the end of the podcast.
It'll change. I know, right? And so that's not the rate that we pay. That's just the starting rate for banks to adjust off of that. So, holy cow.
There are a lot of considerations out there. And, I want to go back to a term that's really been thrown around a lot lately is the social distancing. One of the things about social distancing that may be beneficial right now. So let's say, for example, in a business like your mechanical business, for example, while we do want to make sure that we don't have a ton of employees all in the exact same area and possibly being able to pass, pathogens, back and forth, if you have a facility where people can just spread out. I think I made a suggestion to one of my accounting firms, I think it was last night, and I said, you've got some people who aren't going to want to come to work, and so they're normally working in cubicles. Have them spread out. Do they have a laptop? Can one person go in the lobby and work and another person go in the break room to work, to kind of separate them out? And the same thing with sometimes when you have a work area where people are doing work with their hands, is it possible for them to be able to restructure and refit that area, that work area, that production area, where people don't have to be right on top of each other? And so in some circumstances, it may work out. The ones that I think are going to have a really difficult time are the hospitality type industries. I just saw recently where the city of Miami has mandated that the beaches are closed after 5 o'clock every single day.
How can you stop somebody from walking on the beach?
Not sure.
Okay,
but restaurants and, of course, all of the bars and all these things are closed. And so, of course, the people that are going to be hit the hardest are those people that do not have the opportunity to remotely work or telecommute to be able to do that work elsewhere. So I think that finding creative solutions and say, there's something that may be able to be done, maybe we can do that. Call centers, Apple's call centers, they don't actually have a bunch of physical call centers. They have people that take the calls from their homes. So there may be certain circumstances that people may have to retrofit those jobs, but there may be a way for them to continue to bring in revenue and find creative ways for their employees to still continue to do work.
I was talking with someone yesterday in the event area. Hard hit. Talk about a hard hit. I don't think any event people listened to our episode when we talked about you can, for cents on the dollar, have insurance for events. So if national emergency, you couldn't have it, you would be paid off and still raise the money you were trying to raise or make or whatever. And one part of our conversation went to, I said, I think everybody that's being so heavily impacted right now needs to stand up, walk around 3/4 of the table or even a quarter, take a step to the right. Look at this as from a different perspective. That's how I deal with when me and my husband fight. I go, okay, let me take a step to the right, look at it from a different, angle. is this a way that could possibly benefit you? Is there an opportunity if you change outside your box just a little bit, which I'm a big proponent of?
Me too.
Take a step to the right. Look, is there an opportunity? You know, the restaurants, they're closing their dining areas. I think Chick-fil-A, I saw it where it's closed the dining areas now. Katie went over to Starbucks at McGowan. They're closing the inside. And so, but they're still bringing it to your car. There's a way to, it's better to get something than nothing.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's not like we haven't been here before. In 2008, Hurricane Katrina. But every business out there, if you don't have some kind of plans, I think that's, and if they need your help in doing that, because we don't all have that talent.
Right.
You know, I'm a jump and go. I jump off the cliff, where you make sure people have their parachutes on, they're going to land in a good spot.
Right.
And I like that.
We should put that on the shirt.
I know, right? Let me be your parachute. I'm saying jump. Anyway, is there another opportunity there? And I think there really can be, so that you use this to your effect. What if we were getting a Hurricane Cat 5 and it blew away your building, so your employees had nowhere to come to?
Right.
What would you do? That's what you do now.
Right. One of the things that for this past Sunday, my church, I go to Three Circle Church. I'm in Fairhope, and we had virtual church service this Sunday.
I saw that all over Facebook.
Yeah. And it was awesome. So we were able to, our pastor is still in quarantine. And so he was in the woods, and he, had the video camera, set up, and we were able to look at it, in our pajamas from home. I was like, this is the best thing ever, doing praise and worship while laying in the bed. But one of the things that they offered to other churches is, hey, if you are not set up to be able to do a virtual service, hey, reach out to us. We've got equipment. We'll be more than happy to help you. And I think that type of attitude to, you didn't foresee this coming. I mean, who could have foreseen that, in 2020, the United States would be at a complete standstill and our kids are going to be out of school for almost a month. I mean, nobody could, you couldn't have predicted that. However, there are so many businesses out there and that have services and have products that are available that say, hey, we were prepared. And so we can help you to prepare. We can help you take this thing offline. We can help you to figure out how to set up so that your organization can actually telecommute. Or maybe there's something else that you could focus on. There's another revenue line that you could focus on that you haven't had time for before, that you can still have your people working, and we're going to just focus on this instead. And so I think that there's plenty of opportunities out there, but sometimes it does take someone outside of the organization to take a step back and say, you know what, let's take a look at this. Or maybe this is a really good time in order to change the way and retrofit the way that we do business and bring it into 2020. So I think that there are opportunities out there.
Doing a lot of thinking like everybody else, that I think there's a lot of good that can come out of this. On the other side, it's going to change the way how people do business. And I'll break it down just because it's the most familiar to me. Hard checks. If we have a mandated quarantine, how can they come get their checks? How can you get it to them versus electronic and direct deposit, everything automated, that kind of thing? We've been pushing it, but you always have the hell no, I won't go. I'm going to keep doing it the way I've been doing it.
I know.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And all that's good. I'm all about not breaking something, just to fix it when it was already nothing wrong with it. But there are better ways that things can be done. I think that's going to be a big impact on the other side. But to get back, some of your guidelines.
Well, I have a couple of things that I think will be beneficial to businesses as it relates to human resources. Of course, right now, the biggest one is if you are still open and you're still expecting your employees to come to work, which is fantastic. And there are lots of organizations that, would love for that to be the case right now, to relax your attendance policy. Okay. Again, and like we mentioned earlier, if someone needs to be out, they're not sure. Maybe they don't have symptoms yet, but maybe they know that they've been exposed to someone with symptoms, or they need to take care of someone who has a compromised immune system. And so if they are in the presence of people who may have issues, then it could possibly impact their loved ones, children, dependents, parents, etc., to allow them to take off if they need to take off. Just give them that space. So that's one of the things without necessarily coming down on them with corrective action later. On the other side of that, it's going to be difficult to look at, the abuse of it. Of course, there are going to be some people that are going to be perfectly fine and say, you know what, I just really needed 2 weeks off right now. And so is that a concern? Of course it is, but you've got to weigh out the options in that particular situation.
Big scheme of things.
Yeah, in the big scheme of things, there are lots of people right now who would love to work. And so if all of a sudden you've got 30% of your workforce and they're like, I'm not coming to work, then maybe you can bring some temps in. There are some great organizations and staffing organizations that are here local. Long's Human Resources, Express, iTech Solutions, they are phenomenal.
Long's.
And they'll be more than happy to bring some people into the organization. One of the other things is making a decision on if you can actually afford to pay catastrophe pay. And catastrophe pay is outside of normal PTO, but can you afford, and I think I sent you an email, a text message over the weekend, and I'm like, what type of tax breaks are organizations going to be able to get if they pay catastrophe pay? And I know that that's something that the Trump administration is looking at right now as
part
well.
Of that act I was talking about earlier does have tax credits.
Right.
And the difference between a tax deduction and a tax credit is a deduction reduces your income that's taxed, whereas a tax credit is a dollar for dollar replacement.
Right.
So that was the offset. There's usually always an offset when they make companies do things that can get something on the back end.
Right.
Hopefully they stay in business to get to the back end.
Yes. And so I definitely recommend for all of those, especially those small businesses out there, to reach out to their tax professionals and their accountants to see ways that they could possibly offset those costs. But again, if you have to shut down your organization, if there is a way that you can give them a week, 2 weeks worth of pay, even if you're only doing 25 hours worth for your hourly employees, because your salary people, you're probably going to wind up paying them anyway unless you're shut down for the entire week. But for those hourly people, even if you can only do 20 hours a week, it will definitely be something that's beneficial. Another guideline that I have is doctor's notes. If you have a policy that states that if someone is out sick, that they have to bring you a doctor's note, you may want to relax that just a little bit, understanding that the doctor's offices and the hospitals are going to be packed. They're going to be looking at so many different people. And they may not have time to do paperwork. Right. And so the paperwork is going to probably be a little bit delayed. Now, I don't think that should take the place if you need someone to have a fitness for duty to return to work. If they've been out, they tell you that they've been exposed or they've actually contracted the virus, you can absolutely still ask for a fitness for duty. But I've been out for 2 days. You can't come back without a doctor's note. I think that in these times, you probably really need to consider relaxing that considerably. And one of the questions, I get a lot of questions about FMLA. The Family Medical Leave Act is a federal statute that states that if your employer is FMLA eligible.
I touched my face. I just realized. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Which is generally 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. That's generally you're under FMLA in that scenario. People are asking, well, if I am an FMLA employer and I have people that don't want to come to work because they want to make sure that they're not being exposed, is that FMLA eligible? And the answer is no. You're only FMLA eligible if there actually is an illness, not for the sake of avoiding an illness or injury.
Even under national emergency?
As of right now, the guidelines state,
right?
Today, right, it has to be something that's already there. So there has to be an illness. And then if it's long-term, you can take FMLA, but not in order to avoid it. As of right now, FMLA does not, you cannot take FMLA to avoid
and there are different rules based on the number of employees.
Correct. So if you're not FMLA eligible, and all FMLA means it's unpaid. It just says that if someone is away from work, that if they're away because of an illness, injury, or they're taking care of a dependent or a service member, that they can come back to work and they still will have their same grade in the same job and they don't lose any pay. So that's basically what FMLA states. But no, they're not protected. You cannot take this federal leave if you're attempting to avoid others that possibly may be impacted by the disease at this point. And so that's always, a fun little trick. You can't use FMLA, because you're trying to avoid it. And then the last thing that one of the guidelines that I've been writing about is everything regarding the school closings.
And so what about it?
So with the school closings, we're in a really precarious situation because you have all of these children, elementary school, middle school, intermediate school, high school kids that will be out of school. Baldwin County, it's after Wednesday at 3 o'clock. So if you have an employee, and a lot of daycares are also closing.
Yeah, I listened to Sean Sullivan on the way here this morning. Dalton's kids' daycare is closing, but they're starting Thursday.
Okay.
Just to give people time to scrounge.
Right. And so if you have an employee who has someone who is school-aged and they don't have daycare and there's no one there to help, there's nowhere they can drop their kid off.
Because you have the issue of them going to the grandparents and carrying it to the grandparents.
Of course, if the grandparents are even around.
Right.
When we moved to Fairhope, I had no family in Fairhope. My family's all in Mobile. My husband's family is in Pensacola. There was no one. And there are lots of people here that are transplants that move here. There's nowhere for their child to go.
Or they just have passed on. They don't have family.
Exactly. And so in those situations, you really do need to look at it on a case-by-case basis and help that person make a good decision. So you possibly could have people that say, I can't come to work. I have no one to watch my child.
I've been in that situation before.
Right.
They're fine. Now, one avenue I always opened up, and it was funny, we were having this conversation with somebody who worked with me in the past, and they said, you always expected us to work if our kids were sick. Mm-hmm. I said, not to the same level, but if you have a laptop, so now we're here.
Right.
I always encourage that.
Right.
Why use your time? Mm-hmm. And then I got on a self-managed PTO because Katie was smart enough to talk me into that. But why have that downtime while they're sleeping? I'm not saying don't take care of your kid.
Right.
But if you have the resources, and now this is where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, I would, by the way, recommend, and this is not necessarily the views of this podcast, but for mine and my HR, tin hat is tingling, I would recommend that you do not allow employees to bring their children to work. It's for insurance purposes, for safety purposes. You're bringing them into a completely different environment. And so that's bringing more contaminants possibly there, but also risk of injury. I would highly recommend that you do not bring your children to work, that it should not be a viable solution. I'm just going to leave it.
Or sometimes
there.
allowed and maybe not the norm. But now
I highly recommend against it.
Okay,
I highly recommend
listening.
against it for every client that I have, any client that I'll ever have moving forward. I highly recommend that they do not bring the children to work.
And you're the expert, and that's why we had you on today. So I've got a couple more guidelines and references for people, but tell people how to get in touch with you.
Well, you can find me many different ways. My website is www.moraleresource.com. I can be found on Facebook. Be found on Instagram, Morale Resource, and my number is 251-300-9690. I get calls all the time from organizations that say, I just got a quick question. Can I ask you something? I'm like, absolutely. Now let's sit and let's just have a conversation about it. And
sounds like taxes.
Well, yeah.
Back in the day.
Because usually, with a ball of yarn, you pull the string and you find out that there's something else, that there may be an underlying cause of a reason that you do something. The most important thing is that when I go to meet with a new client or, someone in the business community that I speak with, we just talk about what your concerns and issues are. And for this situation, it's no different. If somebody has a question or they're dealing with something that's really unique, because there is no handbook for this and what we're dealing with right now.
Keywords guidelines.
Absolutely. We'll talk about it and we'll kind of break it apart and see what's best. I believe in a win-win situation, both for the employee and for the employer.
See, I always say win-win-win. It's never less than 3 wins for me because it's about the business owner, the team, and the customer.
Absolutely.
And so if you find that fit where it's a win-win-win, I always see success.
Right. Completely. Yeah. It's about solutions. And so that's what I'm about. I know that that's what you're about too, which is why I love you so very much. We're solutions people.
Stuff. Yeah. Super glue.
Yeah.
I guess a piece of advice that I could give right now is to embrace your competitor. Everybody knows I love competition. I love the other CPA firms in town. We want to be friends with the competition, always have. Do it now because they can be your friends to say, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'll help you through this.
Best practices.
The best business relationships can come out of that, and to reach out to each other just to help, like your church, 3 Circle. And I think that's going to be a big thing and slow. I think the most successful businesses are the ones that don't have a lot of debt.
Yes.
Right now. So look at your finances as you look at how you're going to approach your team members through this. How long is it going to last? Nobody knows. We keep watching. We'd love to keep giving you guys what's coming out, how it's affecting your businesses, people that we can have on to help you solutions or just ensure you that you're not going through this alone. So if you give us a shout out, I hope you watched today. Go on Facebook, give us a like, go to the webpage, subscribe. But we just want to thank Gia so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Johnny, for opening up the studio. Deep Fried Studios here at the Container Yard on Dolphin Street. So anyway, you guys have a great day.
Thank you. Be safe and talk to your folks. Come up with solutions together. We can all win.
Talk to your team. Virtual hugs.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Please be sure to subscribe to Cheers to Business podcast on iTunes or anywhere else that you get your podcast. Visit our Facebook and be sure to give us a like. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, shoot us an email from the website cheerstobusiness.com.